Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. And joining us for this segment, we have Braun, Chief Executive Officer of Ramone Law, a tech-enabled law firm, to discuss disrupting the traditional model of law firms for greater efficiency and collaboration. Rachel, it is great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is a little bit newer of a topic for our audience, but we always love to talk about digitization and innovation on Trade Talks. What does the legal model look like right now?
So I'm not surprised, because one doesn't always think of innovation when you think of the legal industry, because it can be very conservative and slow to change. And pretty much for 600 years, the typical structure of, if you're a really good lawyer, you rise to the ranks, and as you rise to the ranks, you don't just take on more clients, you take on more of the operational running of the firm. And so what essentially Ramone Law did is said, wait a minute, when you do it this way, you're really asking your managing partners to also act as CEOs. And a lot of times there's a lot of structural issues, right? With the overhead associated with running these big traditional law firms with their expensive, fancy offices, all of which are costs that are oftentimes passed on to the client. So with this, I'm really excited to tell you about what Ramone Law is doing extremely differently from the rest of the industry.
Yeah, tell us about that, because you've been outspoken in stating that Ramone Law has completely redesigned the way that we think about law firms.
So Ramone Law is an extremely elite, international, full-service law firm that attracts very entrepreneurial, rainmaker attorneys that are coming from around the world, because at Ramone, what they can do is they can actually work less, make more, and they end up being able to have autonomy and freedom in the way that they practice their law. And so where are the actual differences? So at a actual traditional big law firm, right? There are these extremely skyrocketing minimum billable hour requirements. The law firms are setting your rates. The law firms and these big bureaucratic internal politics committees are the ones that are setting everything from the clients you take on to the teams that you work on, and ultimately are the ones that decide your fate, future, and comp at a lot of these traditional law firms. So what Ramone Law has done is they said, wait a minute, there absolutely needs to be a way that we can do this differently. So we do not have minimum billable hour requirements. Our attorneys decide when they work, how they work, the kind of clients they take on. And it works because at Ramone, rather than at a traditional law firm where a lawyer can work thousands of hours in a year and then only end up taking home 30 to 40% of their collections, at Ramone, we have this very transparent, efficient system where you're taking home 60 to 70% of your collections. And on top of that, our attorneys are happy. And what we've learned is that happy attorneys make for happy clients.
Yep. Well, we certainly learned that through the pandemic as we started to explore hybrid roles across multiple industries. So how do you disrupt a model that has withstood the test of time for 100 years? Because as we can relate on Wall Street, when you think about bankers and analysts first coming into the business, it was almost like a badge of honor working your 20-hour weeks, sleeping in the office over the weekends, especially during earnings season, which we know, work-life balance is more important these days, but you have a very traditional model that you're up against.
That's exactly right. And so I think that there's a larger revolution going on where a lot of people are questioning the underlying structures of big law, big banks, big consulting firms, saying, why is it that no matter how hard I work, the rates at which I need to work and the productivity I need to put out keeps skyrocketing? And who's actually benefiting? A lot of the times it's the law firms that are benefiting, not the attorneys and not the clients. And so what Ramone essentially said was, okay, let's question a lot of the underlying assumptions here. Do you need to be in a fancy, expensive office just to go and sit at your desk in a closed door room next to a lot of other people in closed door offices in order to collaborate? Absolutely not. A lot of the Ramone lawyers come to us and they say, never in my career have I worked more, cross-sold legal work, and collaborated more than at Ramone. And our statistics prove that, right? We have a 40% cross-selling rate, which is extremely high in the industry. And so a lot of these underlying assumptions about how you need to work, if you're a world-class, top-performing attorney, the pandemic helped shatter a lot of those assumptions. And people are saying, I should not have to choose between this false dichotomy of having a top-tier legal career and having work-life balance and a family and a home and the ability to choose the hours that you work and live.
And that was actually my next question. How does Ramone Law attract elite talent in a highly competitive market where I'm sure, just like, correlating it back to Wall Street, everyone thinks of Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley when they get their first, big break into a bank, they want those names. How do you remain competitive in this kind of market?
So it's a great question. And it's one of those things where if you look at the fact that we have been growing by 40% year on year with a 94% retention rate, that tells you a lot. Because overall, you see in the legal industry, the average net promoter score, right? So law firms don't always use net promoter scores, but a net promoter score essentially is saying, how satisfied are you, right, with your law firm? And the average in the legal industry is 33, which puts the average law firm on par with credit cards and airline industries, right? So to be considered world-class, you have to have an NPS score of 70. Well, at Ramone, we have an NPS score of 81, which is literally almost unheard of in the legal industry. And so what is that telling you? It's telling you that people are frustrated. People don't want to sacrifice having these high-powered elite communities and these elite careers and these wonderful, professions that they've dedicated their lives to, but not at the expense of never having that work-life balance, never having the freedom to choose who you work with and when and where. And that's the sort of thing that I think, a lot of people are finally saying enough is enough. Let's go look to see why, the technology that's out there today, the way that we can rethink our business models, all of these things are finally entering into the legal industry in a way that's really exciting and empowering for the average attorney.
And Rachel, to your point from the top, you said this is certainly an underlying cultural shift that we're seeing. But let's talk about innovation in the legal space. Give us an example of 2022 era legal innovation stewarded by Ramone Law.
I love that. So it's one of those things where business goes, Ramone Law goes, right? So I think a lot of law firms can be a little bit slow to embrace the trends they're seeing in the macro international environment. And so one of the things that we do is our Ramone attorneys work in, traditional M&A, corporate markets, private equity, venture capital, a lot of traditional work that you would associate with your average law firm. Absolutely. But we equally also have a lot of emerging growth practices, cryptocurrency, blockchain, cannabis industry, a lot of industries where there's a really exciting legal landscape because it's still evolving so much. And so you see Ramone Law not only building a huge level of expertise in those different practice areas, but the way that we engage with our clients in those practice areas are also reflective of that understanding. So we accept cryptocurrency payments. We accept equity shares and high growth, startups that are coming to us for legal advice. We're very much innovating, not only in the way that we support our attorneys, but also in the way that we support our clients.
And to wrap up here, Rachel, where do you envision Ramone Law in, expanding in the years to come, whether it's practice to practice as a brand, because you really have pioneered what sounds to me like a really unique digital ecosystem.
So our founders, who are absolute visionaries, were able to already, with this idea and the power of this idea, expand Ramone Law to over 15 countries across 4 different continents. And it's one of those things where we're just continuing to see constant international expansion and expansion across the US too, because, 5 years ago, we were called legal rebels. And now across the world, people are saying, wait a minute, this is something that we see as providing freedom and autonomy and an incredible culture of extremely high-powered attorneys who are saying, I want to go be entrepreneurial, I want to go build my practice, and I want to do it with the collegiality of a top-tier law firm. And that is what Ramone Law is able to do. So we're just getting started. We're so excited. And so if that is something that really speaks to, attorneys that tell them to look us up, because I really do think that whether it's at Ramone Law or in the industry more generally right now, there has to be more of a conversation about how we go about thinking about the way we practice.
Yeah, really interesting insight, Rachel. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.